Yeah, well, to be honest, I've been through two elections at Eskom, and it is kind of always the same story. There wasn't always probably a lot of load shedding in the past, or not as much as we do now, but we still had our issues. But the kind of instructions we got from the top was to keep everything running, and what was always termed, run till failure. You couldn't do any maintenance. So I think also that's realistically we need to look at that, and that's why it's happening. You hear about the diesel generators that they're running, and they claim they're not running as much, but they are running, which is quite expensive. But the big thing is, and I think for the country, it's good. Probably they see it as there's no load shedding, it's good. But the real issue is that what actually is happening is no maintenance is being done. So it actually puts us in a worse position that as before. So it's kind of typically every 4 years we see the pattern. So I think load shedding will definitely return. Um, and the big thing is the Eskom infrastructure is very old and aging. Yes, we have the two new stations, but if you really look at it, all of our stations are old. One of the older ones that's still running is Kruger Power Station. I mean, that unit, the last unit at that power station was commissioned in 1968. And typically, a power station has about a 30-year lifespan. So if we really look at the facts, that whole power station should have been shut down before 2000. And now we're sitting at 2024. It's still limping along. Um, so that's the big concern, is that our infrastructure is extremely outdated. We're not going to be able to really build new power stations quickly. So I think the elections is putting a strain on our grid. Like I say, no maintenance is being done, and I think we'll definitely see load shedding again in the winter when the load goes up and um, the power stations are allowed to do maintenance again. Yeah, I think, relatively speaking, the solar industry in South Africa is probably still in its infancy. If we look at the data over the past few years, so they talk about installed capacity. So that is everything installed up to that year. So I think we were at 2022, South Africa was looking at an installed capacity of about 4.2 gigawatts. So that's 4,200 megawatts. Um, and to compare that, a station like Medupi Power Stations, which is one of our bigger ones, we're looking at basically a total capacity of 4,800 gigawatts. So even though, up to 22, all of the solar that's been installed, wasn't even as much as one power station. But if we looked at what happened in 2023, the country's installed capacity, and that's kind of what I call the theoretical installed capacity. I actually think it's slightly more, because they do talk about the capacity that's been added in the C&I space, which is your kind of private sector versus the government sector installing solar. Um, so according to the stats, just in 2023, we added another 3 gigawatts, so 3,000 megawatts. So up all the years up to 22, we had, let's say, 4 gigawatts, and just in 23, we added 3 gigawatts. So we almost doubled our capacity within a year. Um, and I foresee that up to 2023, it's probably gonna mm, almost double every year. So there's still a lot of solar to go up. Um, in wide variety of industries. I think the residential industry, as well as the commercial industry, as well as your grid scale solar stations and plants. So I think the predictions are probably true and maybe also understated. I think one of the biggest issues, facing our industry currently is kind of lack of regulation. Um, and I think there's two factors to it. So there's lack of regulation in terms of the quality of products that's allowed to be brought into the country, um, as well as lack of regulations in terms of the grid. And probably people have heard about it. A lot of people talk, can you put power back into the grid? And I think that's also a bit of a stifling block to the industry. So I think if we can get the regulations sorted, so obviously in the meantime we have to cope with, we deal with what we have. So the main thing we're doing, and we have been doing for quite a while, is to also look at, international best practices, look at regulations from other countries, because a lot of the time that's where South Africa also gets their regulations, is looking at other countries, what regulations works and what doesn't work. Um, and so from the product point of view, what we do from our side still is, any product we do bring in or sell to our clients, we have tested thoroughly ourselves before. Um, Most of the times we also would inspect the factories, look at the warranties, really do our due diligence before selling the products to our clients. And then also testing it once it arrives to make sure that, what's been promised has been delivered. And in terms of the national regulations and the grid, it's still very up and down, if you can call it that. So kind of every governmental area, or let's call it municipality, has its own regulations currently. Like a lot of people probably heard, like at Western Cape, you can most likely feed power back into the grid, where a lot of the other municipalities you can't. But I think it's more than just feeding the power back into the grid. There's very few regulations or understanding of, how to register a system. Can you register your system? When should you register your system? So I think once people have a bit more clarity on that, they will also probably feel more comfortable. If you look at your innovation curves and everything, you get your, early adopters, and then your majority and your late minority and everything. So I still think we're kind of in the beginning of that curve. So you have your early adopters putting solar up and in, and they normally also a bit more willing to take risks. The majority normally is less risk adverse, and they would like to know everything's in place and sorted out. So currently there's no really risk in putting it in, but some people still feel that probably the regulations aren't there to really govern it. And I think the other challenge that the country would face in terms of the lack of regulations is, you know, the products going into the systems and basically being connected to the grid. Because the whole country is just one big grid or spider web. Everything is connected to each other. Um, and you do get aspects like power quality. So if the product that's connected to the grid isn't of sufficient quality and doesn't meet regulations, you can affect the entire area's power quality. So I think there is still a few hurdles to overcome, but I think we are on our way to overcome those hurdles and grow the industry.